everyone, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I am showing you all of my stats from 2022 as well as every single book I read in the year. So I actually did very well in the year of 2022 with my reading. Better than I thought I was going to. My original goal was like 60 books because I was pregnant and then I had a newborn, and based on when I was pregnant with my son, I assumed I was only really going to read 60-ish things. I actually ended up reading 125 books in the year of 2022. Now, granted, some of those were DNFs. I do have 8 DNFs, but I have them here in my stats because I at least tried them. So we're going to basically be going through all of my stats that I keep track of during the year, things that I find really interesting, and then the second half of the video will be every single book that I read. So I have a chart right here of like how it's broken down by month. And as you can see, my lowest months were June and July, the end of my pregnancy, and around when I had my daughter. You can definitely tell I did not read as much then, which I knew was going to happen. I'm proud that I read anything at all, but that's where I hit a little bit of a lull. Then, if we look at the page count though, my lowest page count was actually in May. So for some reason, I was reading a little bit more things, but they weren't as many pages. So again, pretty well done. I did have a little bit of a lull where I was only reading 1,000-ish pages a month for a few months in the middle of the year, but I've slowly started to build back up, and so ultimately that is very, very good for what I assumed was going to happen. So for those 125 books, I read a total of 28,421 pages, which is amazing. For the reading method, I think because of the fact that I was pregnant and then had a newborn, I definitely ended up reading more ebooks than anything else. Usually my physical number is higher, but my ebook number was a 76 total books, or about 60%, whereas physical books was 48, or about 38%. I did also have, I think, one that was like mixed media in the fact that I actually read it, I think, as an ebook and listened to the audiobook, but I did barely any audiobook reading, so I didn't have very many of those. So that was basically just physical books or ebooks. Moving into the book genres that I read, I had a pretty even split between 3 different genres. Usually sci-fi and fantasy are like my top genres, and that is still basically the case. However, romance also made its way up there. So I did read 31 total fantasy books for about 24.8%, almost a whole quarter of the books that I read. I read 30 romance books, or about 24%, and I read 27 sci-fi books, or around 21%. I did read other genres as well. I have a pretty high number of horror and paranormal and contemporary, and then there are a few thrillers, mysteries, crime, and historical fiction actually as well. So I did read a total of 10 different genres, but like I said, the 3 top ones were fantasy, romance, and sci-fi. I haven't really kept track of book length prior to this year. I do use the Caw-Pile system from Book Roast, and I think this is something that she incorporated in this last version of it, and I thought it would be interesting to at least keep track of, even though it's not something I usually do. But it was interesting to note that most of the things that I read were between 100 and 200 pages, so like very short things. Part of this is because I read manga, and most of the manga that I read is between 100 and 200 pages. Same thing for comic bind-ups. And then the next highest ones were like 200 to 300 pages or 300 to 400 pages. Those are very common page lengths of books for like things that I would normally read as books. And the very smallest one was 600 to 700 because I was not reading very many chunkers this year. So I just thought that was interesting. As for the book format, I did read mostly books, like novels, this year. I do count novellas in this novel category. Mostly I'm just sort of splitting it up between like novels, literary books, versus comics or manga, that kind of thing. So I did read 58 novels, or around 46% of the books that I read. I read 37 comics or graphic novels, which is almost 30%. I read 28 manga, which is around 22%, and I read 2 short story collections, which is just under 2% total. Moving into, is it an indie book or a traditional book? This is something I implemented last year, I believe it was, just so I could sort of see how much I'm actually reading in traditionally published work versus indie or self-published work, and I want to say this is around the same as last year. I read 25 indie books, which is about 20% of the total books that I read, versus 99 traditional books. I'm missing a number there somewhere, I don't know. But I read almost 100 traditionally published books, which is almost 80% of everything that I read. As for the age rating, this is another one that is very, very similar to what it has been in the past. I read 77 adult books, or 61, almost 62%. I read 39 young adult books, which is 31%. I read 6 new adult books, which is about 5%, and middle grade was my smallest category at 3 books, which is just over 2%. Then we're moving into how I got my books. I'm actually very, very proud of this chart here because I mostly read things that I already owned from previous years or things that I ended up buying this year, but then I read it this year, which is great. So I read 49 books that I had owned previously, which is almost 40%, and I read 43 books that I bought this year, which is almost 35%. So when you add that up, like, we're over 70% of books read that I owned or bought for myself. And then we have smaller categories where I read like 11 ARCs, or 7 Kindle Unlimited books, 6 library books, 4 webtoons, and 5 books that were gifted to me. I think we're going to go into star rating now, because this is the kind of things that I talk about in my monthly wrap-ups, and then we'll go into some of the other things that I don't usually talk about in my monthly wrap-ups. But for star rating, most of the books that I read this year were 5-star reads. It wasn't quite over half, like we are at 44.8%, but ultimately that's really good, especially since my next highest number are 4-star reads. I read 35 4-star reads at 28%. So when you add those numbers up, I had a good reading year. I did still have some 3.5-star reads, 3-star reads, DNFs, that kind of thing, but ultimately what I was reading I was enjoying. Okay, moving into the things that I don't normally talk about in my monthly wrap-ups, we have some like different representation that I do track in the books. One of the big ones is LGBTQ plus representation, and I am happy to report that this year almost half of the books that I read had some sort of LGBTQ representation in the book. So a little over half, there was none whatsoever. And when I say none whatsoever, I only count it as representation if it is blatantly stated on the page, or if it's something that we can easily infer by the way that the people talk. If it's just like a middle grade where somebody is like going about their business and we don't actually know anything about them, I sort of count it as we don't know anything, it's absent, because it's not something that is told to us. Actually, same thing with adult books. If we have an adult book that has like no sort of romantic or sexual entanglements in it, and we don't know what the characters identify as at all, I don't count that. I'm mostly talking about things that we know for a fact are on page, and 29% of the books that I read, the main character was at least one of the characters that had an identity that was on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and then 18.5% was somebody else in the book, but not the main character. So if there were multiple people in the book and it included the main character, I said it was the main character. In that same vein, I was very happy to report that almost half of the books that I read that way, so if they did have representation, had multiple different identities there. It wasn't just one character that was LGBTQ+, it was multiple characters, multiple identities. But besides that, we did also have people that were gay or sapphic or bi, non-binary. We had a couple sci-fi worlds that were normalized queerness, that kind of thing. Another thing that I was tracking this year that I have not tracked before is disability representation. I thought that would be very interesting to try. It's not as high as the LGBTQ plus representation, and I think that is partly because I don't see that being talked about as much. Like, I don't think it's something that is pushed to the forefront in representation currently, although I would love to see more in books. So 66% of the books that I read did not have any sort of disability representation, but 11% had it with a main character, and 22.6%, so almost 23%, had it in the book somewhere. So this one is a little bit different than the LGBTQ plus rep. We had more people as side characters having some sort of disability versus main characters. And these disabilities ran the gamut. There was a whole lot more to choose from. We had things related to sight and vision, like being blind or missing an eye. We had missing limbs. We had different hard of hearing / deaf relatedness. And then we also had mental health representation, which I did count here as well. And then there were a couple books, it looks like actually 6 total, that had multiple different disability representations in it, which is great, but not nearly as much as the multiple LGBTQ plus identities. As for series versus standalone, I read 37 standalone books, or almost 30%, and I read 88 series, or about 70%. That is very accurate. I read a lot more series than standalones, although I feel like the standalone chunk is a little bit better than last year. I did end up starting 27 series this year, but I finished 9, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is quite good for me. I also do track rereads versus first time reads. I only reread 9 books, which actually is bigger than last year. Last year I only reread a couple things, but most of the books that I read are read for the first time. Then we're moving into the author information that I track. The first thing that I track is whether it is a person of color or not. I do have to say that most of the books I read are not by people of color. I do think I did okay with how many books I ended up reading, but it's not as high as last year. I would like the number to be higher, but it's not something that I personally made a specific priority, even though I could have. So 70% of the books that I read were not by people of color. 28.8% were, because there was one author who I could not verify either way if they were a person of color or not. It was very ambiguous, and so I put unknown for that one because I didn't want to imply anything or assume anything. The next thing that I do is I do end up tracking who wrote it, like their identity, if they identify as a woman, as a man, non-binary. And again, this is if they identify that way. I usually end up having to go by pronouns. So if they use strictly she, her pronouns, I put woman. If they use strictly he, him pronouns, I put man. And I try and double check these as well as much as possible. It is no surprise that I mostly end up reading books by women. That is just what I've always done. I have 67.5% by women. I have 23.8% by men. I have 6.3% by non-binary people, and 1 that is unspecified, because again, I could not find it. I think that was probably a manga author. And then also 1 book was written by multiple authors of multiple different genders. Then we also have if it is a new to me author or an author I have read from before. When I track these kind of things, any of the author things, I don't track it for multiple books. So like if I'm tracking whether an author is a person of color or not, even if I read multiple books by that author, I'm only tracking it once. So there are possibly some books that I read where it's a series of a book by a person of color author and I didn't do multiple books. So it's the same thing for new or returning author. I read 35 books from authors I have read from before and 45 books by new to me authors. And again, that's individual 1 book per author, because as we will see in this next chart, this humongous chart, I read lots of things, and some of these are multiple things by the same author. So the author that I read the most of was Brian K. Vaughan, because I did read some Saga and Paper Girls again this year. Some other authors that I have big numbers for are 6 books by Megumi Morino, 7 books by Kintetsu Yamada, 4 books by Alice Oseman, 4 books by Kamome Shirahama, and then we get into like the 3s. I had 3 by Kaylin Smith, 3 by Kelly St. Clair, 3 by James Tinian IV, 3 by Al Ewing, 3 by Tsubasa Yamaguchi, 3 by Jeremy Hahn, and 3 by V.E. Schwab. But as you can see, there's a ton on here, and I actually read books by 79 different authors in the year. So some of these books I'm only reading 1 or 2 things by an author, and then some I'm reading a lot by an author, but I read 79 different authors. Okay, I want to say that is actually everything for the stats. So now we're going to move into every single book I read in 2022. Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This was a 5-star read. The Brilliant Death by A.R. Capetta. This was a DNF. Vicious. This was a 5-star read. Extraordinary. This was a 5-star read. And Vengeful. This was a 4-star read, all by V.E. Schwab. Saga Volume 7. This was a 4-star read. Saga Volume 8. This was a 5-star read. Saga Volume 9, this was a 5-star read, and Saga Issue number 55, this was a 4-star read by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. The Secret Next Door by Rebecca Taylor, this was a 3-star read. Heart of the Sun by Pamela Sargent and George Dabrowski, this was a 2-star read. Falling Drowning Volume 1 by Yuko Inari, this was a 5-star read. In the Air Tonight by Laurie Handeland, this was a 4-star read. For Goodness Sake Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3 by Caitlin Smith. These were all 5-star reads. Guild by Raven Kennedy. This was a 3.5-star read. A Better Fate by D.N. Bryn. This was a 5-star read. Fantasy of Frost by Kelly St. Clair. This was a 4.5-star read. Whispers of Shadow and Flame by L. Penelope. This was a 4-star read. Soul of a Sword by Julie Kagawa. This was a 4-star read. The Awakening by Carolyn Peckham and Susan Valenti. This was a DNF. The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This was a 5-star read. Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna McGuire. This was a 5-star read. Never Seen by Shannon Messenger. This was a 5-star read. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Weir. This was a DNF. Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessel. This is a 4-star read. Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This was a 5-star read. The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. This was a 3-star read. An Illusion of Thieves by Kate Glass. This was a DNF. Fantasy of Flight by Kelly St. Clair. This was a 4.5-star read. Mirror the Mountain and Mirror the Nest by Emma Rios. These were both 3-star reads. The Razor Blades in My Head by Donnie Goodman. This was a 3.5-star read. Wind Issues 1, 2, and 3 by James Tinian IV. These were 5-star reads. Spellbinder by L.J. Smith. This was a 4.5-star read. God of Neverland by Gamma Ray Martinez. This was a 3-star read. A Man Among Ye, Volume 1 by Stephanie Phillips. This was a 4-star read. Lost Boy by Christina Henry. This was a 4-star read. Hook's Tale by John Leonard Peelmeyer. This was a DNF. Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas. This was a 3-star read. Collide by Michelle Maddow. This was a 3-star read. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This was a 4-star read. Perfect Distraction by Allison Ashley. This was a 4-star read. Heartstopper Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 by Alice Oseman. These were all 5-star reads. Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This was a 5-star read. Lock and Key Crown of Shadows by Joe Hill. This was a 4-star read. What Did You Eat Yesterday Volume 1 by Fumi Yoshinaga. This was a 2.5-star read. DJ Dangerfield by Anita Sunday. This was a 3-star read. We Only Find Them When They're Dead, Issues 1, 2, and 3 by Al Ewing. These were all 4-star reads. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This was a 3-star read. Glass Houses by Rachel Kane. This was a 4-star read. Glitter Bomb, Red Carpet, and The Fame Game by Jim Zub. These were both 4-star reads. A Galaxy Next Door, Volume 1 by Guido Amagakure. This was a 4-star read. Heartbeat by Maria Lovett. This was a 2-star read. Onyenka and the Academy of the Sun by Tola Akogwu. This was a 4-star read. Witch Hat Atelier Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 by Kamome Shirahama. These were all 5-star reads. Renegade Love by Anne Aguirre. This was a 3.5-star read. Once Stolen by D.N. Bryn. This was a 4-star read. The Longing of Lone Wolves by Lana Petrovic. This was a 3-star read. Shoot the Messenger by Pippa DaCosta. This was a 4-star read. Junk Shop Blues by Cole McCade. This was a 5-star read. Blood Trial by Kelly St. Clair. This was a DNF. Blue Period Volumes 1, 2, and 3 by Tsubasa Yamaguchi. These were all 4-star reads. Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. This was a 5-star read. In Absence by Laura Diaz de Arce. This was a 5-star read. Fables Volume 1 by Bill Willingham. This was a 5-star read. One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This was a 5-star read. Space Trash Volume 1 by Jen Woodall. This was a 3.5-star read. The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. This was a 4-star read. The Red Mother Volume 1 and Volume 2. These were 4-star reads. And then The Red Mother Volume 3 was a 3-star read, all by Jeremy Hahn. The X-Hex by Aaron Sterling, this was a 3-star read. Paper Girls Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5, and Volume 6 by Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang, these were all 5-star reads. A Hunt of Shadows by Elise Kova, this was a 4-star read. The Liminal Zone by Junji Ito, this was a 4-star read. Loot by Jennifer Thorne, this was a 3.5-star read. Can't Stop Cursing You Volume 2 by Kensuke Koba, this was a 5-star read. The Dead in the Dark by Courtney Gold, this was a 4-star read. Chew Volume 1 Taster's Choice by John Layman, this was a 5-star read. Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, this was a 5-star read. Tastes Like Candy by Ivy Tholen, this was a 3-star read. No Longer Human by Junji Ito, this was a DNF. The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, this was a 4.5-star read. Sweat and Soap Volume 5, Volume 6, Volume 7, Volume 8, Volume 9, Volume 10, and Volume 11. These were all 5-star reads by Kentetsu Yamada. The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, this was a 5-star read. The Quintessential Quintuplets Volume 1 by Neji Huruba, this was a 2-star read. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, this was a 5-star read. Boys Run the Riot Volume 4 by Keito Gaku, this was a 4-star read. Amari and the Great Game by B.B. Alston, this was a 4-star read. A Condition Called Love Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5, and Volume 6 by Megumi Morino, these were all 5-star reads. In an Absent Dream by Shauna McGuire, this was a 5-star read. The Naughty or Nice Clause by Kate Callahan, this was a DNF. One Way or Another by Kara McDowell, this was a 4-star read. And finally, Make You Mine This Christmas by Lizzie Huxley Jones, this was a 4-star read. And so as I said before, those are everything, like every single book that I read in the year of 2022. Overall, very happy with it, and that's going to be it. Hopefully, 2023 is even better. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more videos. I have videos coming out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will see you then. Bye! Bye.